Tonight's lecture title is the Quran recording and compilation, right? That's what's written in the program. Okay, so we'll go on the basis of that. We're talking about the Quran. We're talking about the most sacred text in Islam, and you have this copy, which is, well, it has the Quran itself, which is actually the Arabic words in it, and it has the English translation, which is these words, and it has an English language commentary as well. So it's not just the Quran that's here, but it is encrusted with commentary, and that's not uncommon. In fact, this is the one I brought with me for the meeting here. You can see it has the Quran page here and then various commentaries and appendices and so on. But there are also Qurans in the library and in the mosque, which are just the bare thing. And that is properly what is called the Mus'haf, or the Quran. And the question arises naturally as to how this was compiled, and that question I think can be dealt with on its own as a separate question, and also it probably invites comparison to the Bible, because the compilation of the Bible is usually a question of major interest to Christians and Jews. But I'm not going to go there, at least not now. And we'll deal with the compilation of the Quran itself, revelation and compilation. The Quran came down to the Prophet Muhammad in two periods. Prophet Muhammad, of whom you have a biography, which is this book. This is a biography based on the ancient sources, and it does represent fairly well what the Muslims have thought of the Prophet's biography. Lived from about 569 to 632. The exact date of his birth couldn't possibly be ascertained, because the calendrical system that Islam uses was only introduced in the last few months of his life. And before that, there was a different calendrical system, the details of which are somewhat murky, where there was an intercalary month that was intercalated irregularly and so on. So consequently, dates before the year 632 are not really ascertainable to the day. And as you go back earlier, they're not ascertainable to the year either, unless there is some coincidental dating of something else that is outside of Arabia. Anyway, the Prophet Muhammad received the revelations in the two periods. There was the revelations at Mecca, which was where he was from and where he lived. That's sort of an odd-looking A. Which were from circa 609 to 622, and in that exact year he made the hijrah to Medina, so the revelations continued at El-Medina to near the time of his death, so until the year 632. So this is a total period of 23 years, and that is a part of the Muslims' description of the revelation of the Quran, that it came down munajjaman or nujuman, which could be translated in installments. That is, it didn't come down all at once, and there's even a Quranic verse which refers to it not coming down all at once, but rather it came down in pieces. And then the question would be, for people who are highly interested in textual criticism and so on, to arrange the pieces then in some kind of chronological order. And that was done by a 19th century German Orientalist named Nöldeke, and it was taken by Rodwell in his translation of the Quran, he rearranged the surahs or the chapters out of the order that they're in now and put them in a different order, and that was also followed until 1990 by N.J. Dawood, who did the Penguin Classics version that is very widespread, widely used, and so on. In 1990, however, N.J. Dawood, finally feeling the heat for the act of vandalism of chopping up the Quran, put the surahs back in the correct order. Not so much because of Muslim criticism of his translation, because since he's a non-Muslim, the Muslims would not be able to use his translation anyway. So you observe that in translation, Christians don't use translations by non-Christians, and Jews don't use translations by non-Jews, so why should Muslims have to use translations by non-Muslims? So they wouldn't be using it, but rather by the present state of literary criticism, which is very much against mutilating the text when you translate it by changing the order of things. Furthermore, it was a proper decision, since the order of the surahs is a chronological order anyway, is purely speculative and is not known by any means exactly what it is, and therefore there isn't any possibility of arriving at a correct order of the revelation of the Quran. The story of how the Quran began to be revealed is often told and is related in that the Prophet Muhammad would go and seek God in the cave in Mount Hira outside of Mecca, and that he encountered the angel there. The angel Gabriel came to him and brought him the first verses of the Revelation, which are often said to be the first 5 verses of Surah 96, but there are other traditions that say that they were other than that. And the revelation was received by him at first unwillingly, because in the process of revelation, he was asked, as the story goes, recite, and he said, Ma ana biqari, which either means, it's ambiguous translation, it could either mean I cannot recite, or it could mean I will not recite. But whether it's that or that, I cannot recite. The angel repeated that 3 times, and he repeated his refusal 3 times, and each time the angel, it said, squeezed him, or made his breathing difficult. And then he said, what shall I recite? And the revelation then started coming at that point. And at that point, it said that he ran back to his wife and said, cover me up with clothes to hide from the angel. And that another surah came down, which is, O you who are covered up in the cloak. Of course, these could be exegetical traditions that are seeking to explain verses and how they came about. And in any case, his wife is said to have reassured him that no, this was a genuine revelation, and taken him to her relative, who was a Christian, who said that this is the law which came down before, and I'm sure that you have a true revelation. And if it was destined for me to live on, I would have been your follower, and so on. And all of this story is in that Martin Ling's book, so you can look through the chapters in the Martin Ling's book until you get to the one about how the Quran started to be revealed. It's given there in considerable detail. And after that, the revelation would come to the prophet in a certain state. He would receive revelation throughout the 23-year period that was left to him in his life, so that he would be getting these revelations and then he would be speaking them out to the people. And it is said in the tradition also that the prophet used to memorize the revelations, that the angel Gabriel came to him once a year and would go over all of the revelations with him that he'd learned up to that point, so that his memorization would be accurate, except in the last year of his life, the angel came twice and went over the revelations twice. It is the Muslim belief that the Quran is the exact transcription of those revelations, and that it neither lacks anything from what was intended to be revealed and preserved, nor includes any word, jot, tittle, extra from what was originally given in the revelation. In that sense, one will notice when you read the Quran that the Quran is very self-referential, that it often refers to itself as that is the book about, it starts out in the second chapter, that is the book about which there is no doubt, guidance for believers. And it says, this Quran, if this Quran had been sent down on a mountain, it would have been split asunder out of fear of God. And it's very frequent, almost in every page and almost in every surah, that there is self-reference to the Quran. From a view simply of looking at a text, in the Bible does not contain this type of self-referentiality, except rarely. The prophets in the Bible sometimes begin with a sentence saying, the word of God came to so-and-so, son of so-and-so, and so the implication is that is a self-reference. And the other exception is the book of Revelation at the very end of the Bible has a considerable amount of self-reference in it, but the other books generally do not. And that could be good or bad, depending on your point of view. It doesn't, of course, really say anything necessarily, but it does have certain consequences when people are following the religion. That says this is a book from God, that is stated directly in the book repeatedly. And so it's not something like one can come along easily then and say, well, this is just some kind of later compilation by well-intended people who may have been sort of vaguely guided by a spirit or something, and therefore has some kind of truth to it. But rather, it's kind of definitive, definite, separating and differentiated from other speech, which is outside and apart from it. And the assertion of the Muslims also is that this revelation is distinct from other utterances of the Prophet, which are called the Hadith, and which are found in the other book that you've been given here, this one. Of course, this is a mere sample of a few Hadiths. The actual total number of Hadiths is unknown. Nobody has ever counted them, because a lot of them are sort of resemblant to each other, but not exactly. So what do you count as different Hadith? You count if just one letter is different, or one word, or there's an extra sentence in it, or, it's very hard to count how many different hadiths there are. But the total number would certainly be less than 50,000. And it might not even amount to more than 20,000, perhaps. In this book, there are actually 44 separate traditions, even though it says 40 hadith, and even though the traditions are numbered up through hadith 42, but two of them have two different ones under one heading. Anyway, that's that book. Now, that represents also the acts and the speech of the prophet and so forth, but it is not taken as being a revelation in the same sense that the Quran is a word-for-word revelation from God. And so there's a difference in that respect. It is not taken in the same sense. Now, there is a certain amount of dispute between Muslim and non-Muslim scholars about the mechanism and the writing down and the transmission of the Quran and its attestation according to different historical methodologies. And especially in the postmodern era that you are aware of, there have come about certain ultra skeptical viewpoints about everything connected with the distant past, or in fact even with the recent past. As an illustration of that, there is the book by Hayden White, the American historian, called Meta-History, in which he shows how the 4 major historians of the 19th century were dominated by certain tropes, and that since history always has to tell a story, if you write a book of history, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. But life does not have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so there's an essential falsification that enters in immediately. And furthermore, for the story to be any good, there has to be emplotment. That is, there has to be a plot, and the story has to be something reasonable. So he says, these 19th century historians corrupted history. And in fact, we can't know anything factually about the 19th century. It's too remote. The information is lost, and all we are doing is looking through these various colored and dark glasses, and so we can't know anything. Well, if you take that kind of attitude about the 19th century, what could possibly be left when you come to medieval or ancient times? Then you really don't know anything, because the surrounding silence is very great. All you have are these literary pieces that have come down. How do you know anything about them?